From Here Comes Mr. Jordan to Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm Jason Burns.
And I'm Danny Nucci, and this is the What About podcast.
What about you, Danny? What's been going on? I feel like we haven't just had like a, hey, what's up conversation.
No, I had a lovely time. I was away. I got COVID. It was fantastic. I loved it. I'm happy to share
it seems to be that it is rolling back around everywhere.
Yeah, it's rolling around. I mean, to me, it's still amazing. Like, oh yeah, did you get the flu? Yeah, I got the flu.
Mm-hmm.
That the fact that that's sort of the way it's being talked about.
We're also nearing football season, and I know we talked a little bit about it in this conversation with Michael B. Silver. But what are you most excited about for this year, man? What are you looking forward to?
It unfolding. You never know who's going to win. Who's your favorite? Who's going to win the Super Bowl? Okay, you start with Kansas City, but they're an injury away from not getting far in the playoffs. What are the Bills going to do? What are the Ravens going to be like with Derrick Henry? You know what I mean? Like it's fascinating.
You could just look at your team, the Colts, and say, okay, Anthony Richardson was rolling last year, got hurt, things go, upside down. I mean, it just changes so quickly from one moment to the next.
Yep, injuries and turnovers. It's always been injuries and turnovers.
My biggest worry for the season is that I don't think I can really stay up past 9 p.m. anymore. So those Sunday night, Monday night games are in trouble.
That's hilarious. That's right, because you're East Coast. See, I'm done by 9. I'm done by 9 p.m.
11:30 end times are going to be rough for me moving forward.
Well, we got a Giants fan here today, Michael B. Silver. He's been in 1,000 things. I was trying to see all the things that we had both done. You know, the I can't speak. The NCISs, the CSIs. And he's done a bunch of television.
I'd like to point out he also was in Supernatural, my favorite TV show.
Of course. But he's best known for his recurring role on NYPD Blue. Without further ado, Michael B. Silver. Look at you with the Giants thing. Have you been watching the Hard Knocks?
Oh, yeah, man.
Is that fun or what?
Amazing. You never really get off-season info about how it all goes down. It's crazy how little they really know.
No, but I was watching with my wife, who loves the Hard Knocks, which is great, but she's like, why is it just about this guy? Where's the players? Why is it just about this one dude, Shane, the GM? And I go, because that's basically how it works where it is.
Yeah.
But man, thanks for coming here. This is great. We're so happy to have you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm really happy that the story's getting told. It's an important story.
By you, which is great, which is so cool listening to your voice. And it's really the podcast itself. I only got to listen to the first episode, but it's really, and I love the opener, and I love the how you get into it. And it actually, this was a rabbit hole that I really kind of enjoyed going down. Sometimes with these things, it feels a little bit like part of my gig. But this was like, I was way interested. Who's that little fella? I mean, you're not going to get away without talking about that guy here on this podcast.
Leo's always right next to me.
Is Leo like a mix, a little bit of a Chihuahua
mix?
He's
a mix. He's Chihuahua Terrier. He was a rebound dog. We had 2 beautiful labs and they both died. And so my little kid got this one. So I'm stuck with him now. He's off in college.
So Michael, you were born in New York. Are we talking to you in New York right now?
No. I'm in Los Angeles. I was born and raised in New York City. My grandmother left my grandfather and took my mom out to New York. So I ended up born and raised in New York City. And then right after I graduated, I ran out to LA because my grandfather, because my sister had also hit. My sister's a big screenwriter, and so she had written "And the Rocks the Cradle" while she was.
Oh man, I know she's involved in the Planet of the Apes films, and I talk about those all the time on here because those are so they are so much better than they deserve to be. They're such good movies, they really are.
She's a baller. She and her husband Rick are writing partners, and they like live in one room and then write in the next room over. They never leave that cloister. So. But they're great, and she hit right off the bat. She's super smart, and I was just like, get me out to Hollywood.
Mm-hmm.
So and I thought I'd be out here 3 years by a brownstone back in New York. And
by the way, most New Yorkers do that. They come out here for the entertainment industry. They're all like, yeah, I'm just gonna go check things out. Things are a little slow in New York. It's limited. New York's great, but it's limited. If you're not doing theater, it's limited. I'm just gonna. Next thing you know, 40 years goes by, 30 years.
Yeah, that's what happens.
That's how it is. That's how it is.
You get roots and also the lifestyle out in Los Angeles is a lot easier, especially these days in New York. It feels pretty intense.
It's a beating. New York is a beating. I mean, I understand that
Yeah.
it's like here's one of the things I liken to New York, the difference between New York and LA. As an actor, if you're
Yeah.
unemployed in New York, other than the financial part, it's fucking great. You can have a life. You're not worried
Yeah.
about being unemployed necessarily. You can have great days. There's always stuff to do. In LA, it's like there's death. You're unemployed in LA, it's fucking death. You're reminded of how unemployed you are everywhere you turn.
You know what? You know what though? I teach also, and I mentor a bunch of young people, and I'm constantly talking about that. Constantly talking about how easy time just drifts by, and especially if you're unemployed, how you can just get lost, and how important it is to be proactive, especially these days with so much equipment at your disposal to create your own content.
Yeah, remember when we were coming up, you didn't even. You didn't create your own content. That was, was 80,000, and from your family going, can you give me 80,000 to make a short?
That's right. Yeah, or you go put on a play, or you do a showcase and try and get someone to come see it. But now you can write anything and go shoot it, and it's right there.
Yeah.
So your grandmother moved back to New York because I know your grandfather was in cons, right? So were your parents involved in the industry as well?
No, it skipped my parents, but yeah. It skipped that generation. My mom was kind of sick and for most of her life, and so she never really pursued much. But it was certainly in her blood, and I'm sort of jumping to the end of the story because they started off in New York, then moved to Hollywood, made a huge splash, had a lot of drama, and then split up. He went off to France because he was blacklisted, and there was a whole sort of artist bohemian community there in the south of France, and she was in New York, and she was in her own right just an amazing person. She was an engineer. She was the head of the Anti-Nazi League. She was an incredible person.
I know we're going to get into you as well, but I know because we've already mentioned your grandfather, if you want to give listeners a sort of overview of who he was in terms of his career, and then we'll get into the meat and potatoes of the Red Scare later, but just to sort of set the stage a little bit, Michael.
Yeah, well, he was a playwright in New York City in the 20s. And he had some moderate, success, but not much. And then, of course, when the Depression hit in '29, everything fell out. Broadway died. And in 1930 or 31, he was brought out to Los Angeles by Cecil B. DeMille to write Name of the Cross. And there's some fun DeMille stories that he used to tell. But he worked his way up and ended up getting recruited by Harry Cohn, the infamous Harry Cohn at Columbia, which is like a mile away from where I'm sitting right now. And he ended up, he was an amazing writer. And so he wrote a bunch of beautiful films and, Song to Remember and The Awful Truth and Lost Horizon.
And he also helped co-found the Screenwriters Guild as well.
Well, right? Yeah, while he was doing that, he was working with the writers. My grandmother was all about, progressive ideals, fighting fascism and fighting the Nazis, and also labor unions, right? There was a lot of Jewish progressive thought trying to help the unions in the 30s and 40s. That was all growing. And so she was very active. And, The Way We Were, the movie The Way We Were, was loosely based on my grandparents. I think they knew the screenwriter, and the story is very similar. She was just a loudmouth Jewish commie intellectual who was also an engineer. She worked on flutter engines during World War II, and she was she was the head of the Anti-Nazi League as a female. And she was a major organizer for labor and for the Communist Party. And my grandfather was much more the writer, didn't want to get that involved in politics. I think he liked the ladies. He was very, good looking and had a lot of interests. We could leave it there. and so the two of them, so he got involved in organizing labor as well. I think she kind of pushed him a bunch. And the Screenwriters Guild of America was formed. He was a co-founder and ended up being the president in like 41 or 42. But there was a whole cross section there because, and this will lead right into the blacklist, because for the studios, the blacklist was really about labor unions. It was about trying to bust up labor unions, which were also connected to, which were all founded by Jews, which started the business, and also Congress saw it as a way to go after all the progressive thought that was subversive, and also anti-Semitic, which is such a resurgence now. It's such an interesting time period to be going back. But anyway, there was a lot of fervor about after the war and lead up to the war about communist thought and about subversion and about people inside the government or inside Hollywood, propagating propaganda, communist propaganda into their films. And so, as they rose up, and as Harry Cohn saw that my grandfather was not only a great writer, but also a good manager of people, he kind of brought him close, made him a producer and a manager of this whole group, which was a huge wing of the business, while he was also writing.
Which was a big deal then, Michael, right? Because writers didn't have the same respect that they
had a
today.
room with the other writers over there in the back of the lot.
And they used to have to type real fast when the
That's right.
boss would walk by.
he would talk about that. He said that the writers were almost chained to their typewriters. That like a factory, they had to come in at 9 and they had to be typing, and if they couldn't be thinking, they had to be typing. He talked about how stressful that was.
So he must have saw something in your grandfather that went beyond his ability to put a word to the page.
He did.
That wouldn't have gone well in this everybody gets a trophy world. Let me tell you something.
No. This was pre everybody gets a trophy. Absolutely. But he was split. His loyalties were split because he was making a great living for Cohn. And he was sort of trying to humanize. He said he was trying to humanize him a little bit. He was kind of an animal, that guy.
Cohn? I read his biography.
Yeah,
King Cohn. Holy fuck!
Yeah. He was a bombastic sort of Trumpian character and very misogynistic and very ambitious and didn't have a lot of
all the stereotype old Hollywood, studio head. Really, I mean, he epitomized all of it.
Yeah. He was Harvey Weinstein before.
Exactly. Exactly.
He really was. Yeah. And so my grandfather tried, I think, to humanize that place. At least that's what he said. And he was split between trying to write great films, and he won an Oscar for and wrote Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, which was one of the most patriotic movies of our history. And then as the war ended, and the fervor towards the Red Scare started to happen, all the fear about communism and socialism was sweeping across, Europe, and Mao Zedong was coming in, and obviously Russia. And so there was a lot of fervor in the country about like what was going to happen and if democracy would survive.
So knowing what your mom knew and seeing what happened to her parents, when you and your sister decided to go into this business, was there any reservations on her part?
Well, before you answer that question, when you're at Brown University, are you an actor at this point?
So funny you ask. So I was a lacrosse player in a fraternity, completely undercover, and wearing a mask. And at some point halfway through, I was like, I hate these guys. I suck at lacrosse. I knew it was in my blood. When I was 5 years old, I knew I wanted to be an actor. So I left the frat and started doing shows, and I was ostracized, of course, by my frat boys. I can't even talk about it. I can't say what they called me. And it's been canceled.
And Providence is small, so if you're ostracized, there's nowhere to go.
Absolutely.
So did you spend time, Michael, at like the Avon Cinema? Was that your spot to?
Oh, the Avon, dude.
The cable car was the cable car around then.
The cable car. How do you know Providence?
I grew up in North Attleboro.
Oh yeah, so you're right there.
Yep.
Yeah, those are our spots, man. I saw the Wall there, and every Saturday night.
I would go to like the midnight shows of like Reservoir Dogs when it first came out.
Yeah, dude, totally. Rocky Horror.
Yep,
totally.
Yep.
Yeah, you've been in LA dude. Totally. That's hilarious. Because that's how I speak, dude. Totally, bro.
Are you a New Yorker too?
Originally, but I went to high school here, so I consider myself from here.
Here meaning Los Angeles.
Los Angeles, yeah.
Where'd you go to high school?
Grant High in the San Fernando Valley.
Oh yeah, I know Grant.
Go Lancers.
I've been by there a bunch.
Go Lancers. Go Lancers.
So you're at Brown and you decide, okay, I need to pursue acting. That's the moment.
When I was 5 years old, my dad was a huge movie buff, and even though my mom's side of the family was the movie business, my dad I think was partially drawn to my mom because he was so infatuated with film, with my grandfather and his whole story, and so. My dad used to take us to the Regency and the Thalia, which were two revival houses in New York back in the 70s. And every weekend we'd go see like Gary Cooper Festival or like Kazan Festival or whomever. And so my sister and I both got an amazing education in film. And I remember when I was like 5 or 6 or maybe 7, I was watching City Lights, Chaplin.
Sure.
And it's the end, and she's blind, right? It's like 26 or something. she's blind, and he finds the money to get her the operation. He's the tramp, right? He's got nothing. He finds the money to get her the operation, to get the new eyes, and she gets the new eyes, and now she can see. And she sells flowers on the street. But now that she can see, he's terrified that she won't love him anymore because he's just a tramp. And I just remember being a tiny little kid. And so he walks up to her and he buys the flower from her. And she touches his hand and realizes
it's him. Yeah.
I'm going to get off the cliff right now. But I remember, like, I was 7 years old, and she loves him, of course, and they love each other. And I remember I was 7 and I was like I was laughing, but I was crying at the same time. And I was like, what is that?
You saw the power of what film
I
could
saw
do.
the power of that. Totally. And I was so moved. And I was like, that's what I want to do. And somewhere I felt like I can do that. Like, that's where I belong. And so that was kind of a secret for me because I was a jock in high school. And
what's the age difference between you and Amanda?
The age difference is 4 years.
And she's older than you.
So she was out here. She's older.
Right.
She's
so when she was in school, she's already in studying creative writing, right? It's already
well,
happening.
She was a rock star from the very beginning. She's just super brilliant, and she went to Yale, and she made all these films, and then she went to USC Film School and started the whole screenwriting program.
And so she was already way ahead of you, bro.
Yeah, well, she still is, dude. I'm chasing her my whole life.
No, she's adjacent. It's a different thing. It's a different
She's
thing.
In a whole
it's a different thing. I mean, let me ask you this: you think if somebody gives her a script, she can make it work as an actor?
No.
That's my point. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. It's a different skill. It's a little bit of a different skill. Yeah, that's what I mean. It's adjacent.
She's much more of the introvert, and she likes to sit at her desk and write and think and read. And I'm much more connective and collaborative.
Yeah, sure. Say these lines as if they're your own. Good luck.
And
make it believable. Good luck. Let me know how that works out.
We used to make films on these giant VHS cameras back in the day. And I had one film that I've saved of her acting, and she was horrible. She was the worst.
So she's already moving with this. This is like shit. Obviously,
this is her B plan.
Yeah, so she's a fast train moving in this industry. By the time you're at Brown, going,
yes,
I don't want to play lacrosse.
So she was in LA when you decided to come to LA. That's a free place to stay, right?
Well, yeah.
Hold on, we're fast forwarding. I'm not ready to fast forward. So, are you doing plays at Brown? Are you making the adjacent move to New York to work there because it's not such a jump?
So I jumped to the theater community, who obviously didn't trust me or didn't like me because I was a frat boy, and so I was stuck between two worlds. But I found these amazing ladies in the theater department, and that was it. I was done. I got cast in a play, and I found a girlfriend who I was crazy about. And all of a sudden, I became part of that community, and it's a really tight knit thing at Brown, and the theater group is very much of their own. So I never really got on the inside of it, and there's a lot of super talented people who are just making big waves in the industry right now.
But also, Michael, Providence, especially that like Thayer Street vibe, it's very creative. You must have been feasting on that creativity as well.
Yeah, I found a whole black box theater that wasn't the main stage that I wasn't really invited into, but me and my boys did all kinds of amazing work there, and I learned so much. It felt like grad school on some level because I was living and breathing it those last couple of years. And we just did as many shows as we could. And I did every job I could find and started writing and directing. And I just loved it. I just knew I couldn't wait to get out to LA. And plus my sister sold this thing in film school. I was like, this is going to be easy. This is going to be easy.
Sure.
I'm just going to go out to LA.
Sure, it's your destiny. Of course it is.
Yeah, totally. It's in my blood.
So there was no thought of going down to New York from where you were? You just went.
You know what? My folks were there. My folks were in New York. My sister was in LA, and she had just hit hard. And my grandfather made such big waves out here. I just figured LA was the place for me. And plus, I graduated in '90, so New York wasn't quite as.
No, it's commercials.
New York didn't have the production.
But then you went out to LA. You eventually get NYPD Blue, but that's shot in New York, right?
No, shot in LA.
Yeah, they'd literally go once a month and shoot a bunch of exteriors in New York. But
that's what we do. We'd go like a couple times a season and shoot a bunch of exteriors, but mostly it was at Fox, and they have all these streets there that in New York and a lot of the whole interior there. That show was an amazing experience, and I was so lucky to be a part of it. And the talent there was unbelievable.
And you worked with Milch, which is a whole other kind of writer.
Milch is a whole other story, but I mean, I learned so much from that guy. It was like 3 or 4 years out here. My second audition was Reservoir Dogs.
Well, there you go. I was watching it at midnight showing at.
Amazing. And I met with Harvey Keitel and Madsen and Tarantino, who hadn't done anything.
Mm-hmm.
And Tarantino had one of these giant cameras that he was taping the auditions.
Yeah, he
on.
was just a video store guy then, right? I mean, that was
totally. He had like 11 scripts in his drawer that he hadn't sold. And so at some point, and I was doing good, and I could feel it, and I was a huge fan of Keitel from Mean Streets, of course, and from everything else. And so they picked me up out of my seat, which has never happened in the 34 years I've been doing this since. Throw me on the desk. Tarantino's now shooting down on me, screaming for my life.
Are you playing the cop? Are you reading for the cop?
Scene. No, I'm reading for Eddie, a nice guy Eddie, the son of the boss.
Yeah.
And I crushed it. And I got a call from my agent when I got home. You booked it. We went out and got drunk. I got a call the next morning saying, Chris Penn is a good friend of this guy Tarantino. So he's going to give him the part, but he's going to remember you for next time.
Yeah.
This guy's going to do a lot of movies. He's going to remember you. And that was the last I heard of it.
Yeah, of course. That's exactly
But it makes a great story, doesn't it?
It's a good story, yeah.
What about the Red Scare?
Well, Michael, let's talk about the podcast, Mr. Buchman Goes to Washington. Obviously, it involves your family. Were you involved in this from the get-go?
So this amazing guy named Bill Baber came to me and said, I did my master's on your grandfather, and I would love to collaborate with you. I've written a screenplay, and I've now turned it into a scripted podcast to create some IP in order to sell this project. And so I read it. It was pretty beautiful. It basically centers on my grandfather's testimony before the House Un-American Activities Committee.
Writing a letter to you, right? That's the inroad.
He's speaking into a tape recorder just because it's audible. I mean, because it's because you can hear it. But he wrote me a million letters, so he was an incredible letter writer. In fact, a bunch of us just sat and read hundreds of his letters. The stamps alone evidently are worth a bunch. But he was an obsessive letter writer, I guess, before phones and TV, and there was just the typewriter. And so he communicated a lot to me.
He would have loved text.
Yeah.
He
Totally.
would have loved text.
I always think about him with the text, totally. Bill came to me and said, "Do you want to be a part of this?" And it was already kind of formed. I didn't really have a chance to add in a lot of my own stuff. There was a lot of personal things that I added in there, like just references and his language and his vernacular, which was pretty beautiful.
Going back, Michael, to look at those letters and then bring them into the voice of the character?
Yeah, into the podcast. I mean, trying to find his voice, but also trying to find, like, for instance, when my grandfather was 72 at the end, he was in Czechoslovakia researching a movie about Mozart. And he fell in love with his translator, who was 27. And
as one does,
and being an old movie mogul, got her pregnant, married her, or maybe married her and got her pregnant, who knows? And then passed away, unfortunately, when he was 75, 74. So my aunt is younger than me. She's an amazing person. She lives in Italy with her two little kids who are my cousins. And we have an amazing relationship. And so I wanted to add them in a little bit. I wanted to have Carly, who's my aunt, sitting on his lap while he was talking to me, because I wanted to include them, this whole other part of his life that not included. So I had a little bit of input into the podcast. Obviously, I play my grandfather talking to me about his story, which is such a meta mind.
It's trippy, right? It's got to be weird.
Yeah, it was trippy. And I got really emotional doing it because, I feel such a connection to him. He and I were really close, even though I was little. And I've obviously done so much research, and our family is so
it's great when there's no acting necessary, isn't it? Great when it's
just
sitting there for you. Right there. I'll take this.
Totally. It was just
best.
Right there. In fact, I found a lot of it was about holding it down and just trying to let the information come and not get emotional.
A lot of it is probably stuff you maybe never even processed, right? Like stuff you just never met with face to face.
I would tell people his story from his point of view to sort of tell the story of my family and my pride and our pride in his life. But I never put myself in his shoes before and looked at the world or his family or his grandson. I'm going to get emotional right now. It's a whole other thing as an actor when you get behind someone's eyes and you sort of have empathy for their journey rather than looking at this mythological character I grew up with idolizing and on this pedestal. He wasn't. He was a dude, and he had a lot of foibles. And reading those letters between my grandparents, he clearly was a lot of things that I didn't know. And, he was insecure in certain ways and immature in certain ways and needed a lot of affirmation and a lot of
because we see our parents and our grandparents almost as superheroes.
Yeah.
Well, in essence, but that's how the guy who had written his thesis on it came to you. He's like, there's this mythical figure and I want you involved, and what you bring to it is, hold on. Let's just who is this man and this
that's exactly what happened.
Which, by the way, that comes through.
Yeah.
That's great.
That comes through because especially when, and I mean, again, this can get very meta very quickly, especially with what's going on today. The parallels are a little bit frightening, but the seriousness of society at that time and what he was going through, and really the kind of what's happening now in a certain way in Hollywood, the removal of your livelihood.
Cancel culture, like the OG of cancel culture.
Yeah, it's the original cancel culture.
Right. And like stoking the fires of division and fear and, there's so many parallels that are going on today.
So just for the listener who may be younger and doesn't know much about it, can you just talk a little bit about how it turned and what happened in terms of the Red Scare and McCarthy and the House of Un-American Activities and how that got focused on Hollywood?
Yeah, totally. Well, look, as the labor unions started to come together and as the war ended and the fear of socialism and communism really took hold in this country, the government created the House Un-American Activities Committee and a couple other committees to investigate both government workers and create loyalty programs and loyalty oaths.
Because at this point, Stalin became, in essence, a parallel to Hitler in terms of the communism.
Yes. After the Hitler-Stalin pact, my grandparents were devastated. And they talked about that a lot, that their whole idea of socialism and, they were against segregation and they were against fascism. And they had all these black friends back then that they were trying to empower. My grandfather wrote a movie about the Harlem Globetrotters in the 40s just to try and give more work to black actors. And at some point along the way, because of the war and because of fear being stoked and people like Joseph McCarthy, all of that got lumped into subversion. And so there were a lot of progressive values, Jewish values that had been roped into communism. And they certainly crossed paths. I mean, there were a lot of Jewish commies who started the movie business. I mean, that's just the way that was.
More socialist than communist, Marxist communism.
That's right.
Yeah,
Marxist
communism. Yeah,
far left in a way that's sort of different but similar to what's going on today. So anyway, they created this HUAC, this House Un-American Activities Committee. They went after people in government, and then they came out to Hollywood because it was an easy way to, a lot of publicity. And they figured if they found a bunch of communists in Hollywood, the whole country would be scared. They bring them back to Washington.
Was part of that, Michael? I'm sorry to interrupt you, but you hear a lot of people on the right today saying that Hollywood is stoking culture wars. Was it a lot of the same vibe then, where they thought Hollywood was influencing people by what they're putting out into the world?
Very much so.
Very much so. They were talking about communist propaganda, socialist propaganda in films. Mm-hmm. And so, my grandfather who wrote Mr. Smith Goes to Washington was one of those people. And it was less about the actual propaganda within the films and much more about trying to weed out any subversive elements within the business. And they did, they created fear. They came out to Hollywood. They subpoenaed 40 people. They put pressure on them and they forced them to answer questions like, are you now or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party, which at the time was a legal California party to be a part of. And you had two choices, right? You could either cooperate and praise the committee, and you had to name all the names of the people you knew who were also subversive or communist.
Was this in front of the entire Congress or just the committee?
This was in front of the country.
Congress and press, the world, essentially.
The world. They televised these testimonies, and my grandfather refused. Well, I'm cutting ahead, but they first got these 40 people, and of them, 10 of them said, "Screw you, I'm not going to cooperate," and they pleaded the Fifth Amendment, which was, I'm not going to say anything on the grounds that may incriminate me. But they also turned it on its head and said, this committee has no right to ask these questions. We have civil liberties. We have the right to assemble. We have the right to express ourselves, right, freedom of belief. And you have no right to ask these questions or to take our livelihood. And so those 10 people were sent to prison for a year, and they were fined, I guess, $1,000 or something. But their careers were over. None of them ever worked again until much later, until 15, 20 years later. And so the second, and so that happened. And my grandfather was not part of the first 10. He was sort of on the outskirts of that. But he came in a couple of years later with his brother. And Sidney had a real problem because he didn't want to, he was split, right? As I said, Cohen made him a manager as well as a laborer. And so he really lamented what he was going to do. And that's what the podcast is about, as well as the film that we're now creating from the podcast, which is much more in depth and much more a love story between my grandparents than about just the testimony. But anyway, my grandfather decided in his brilliance, I'm not going to take the fifth because I'll just get screwed. And I'm not going to cooperate. That was never on the table. So he pleaded the First Amendment, which was freedom of speech. And he said, I will tell you anything about my involvement in the Communist Party, which was long over for him by then. But I'm not going to tell you anything about my friends. And you have no right to ask them.
And because at this point, what people didn't, at this point, it had been going on long enough to know that what's going to happen once you name your friends. The
That's
repercussions of that on them, started to become quite evident, like, you're fucking done.
So did somebody name your grandfather? Is that how he...
Yeah, this guy, Martin Berkeley, who was a screenwriter, named 150 people. And so my grandfather was one of those people. And, at the end of the day, he refused to even confirm the names that they had already had. When he went into the thing, he told them they couldn't film him. He refused. So they said, well, Mr. Buchman, we're on live television. What do you want us to be? He said, you can shoot my hands. So there's this amazing footage of his hands while he's testifying, which is an incredible visual.
Which now I'm going back to the Tramp with the woman touching.
Yes, totally. I didn't even see that, dude. That's awesome. The hands, totally. And my grandmother used to say that I had my grandfather's hands, so there's a little denouement on that as well. Mm-hmm. But in the end, he what was I going to say? He refused to name the names. But wait, there was one more point that he did that was brilliant. I can't remember where I was going with that.
Well, in essence, you were saying that he was one of the people that was named, but he didn't want to be filmed. They wanted to talk to him, and they wanted to say, okay, so we can't film you, so. What is it that you have to say? But in essence, he was named. Is where you were.
He was named, and then I remembered there was one more technicality that happened, which was he had written this movie, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, and there was a whole thing about the quorum. You need a certain number of senators in the committee for it to be an official act, and he testified on the last day of the last hearings in the afternoon at the end, and for whatever reason, and there's a lot of theories about this. One of the senators, Senator Jackson, who was a Democrat, got up and left. He said, I have to go. I'll be back. And he left. So there was no quorum. There were only two senators in the room.
And he knew that because he wrote the film and did the research on the
film. He always said on his deathbed even that that because there was no quorum, he was absolved from legal action, and he got off on a technicality. He was then later subpoenaed in front of all of Congress, and he said, F you, I'm not coming in. So he always said that he never wanted to get off on a technicality, that his friends had all gone to prison, and that his greatest shame was that he didn't, that he stood up, but that he got off on a technicality.
That's where the parallels to today's society really come in. Is
right.
You're literally shamed. You are left with this. You're one of these people for having because you're not part of the zeitgeist of what's happening. You are an outsider. You are out. You are other.
Yeah.
And people treated you as such. I mean, people in Hollywood wouldn't touch you, even like you were, persona non grata in the community that you had thrived in.
Yeah, he lost everything. He was destroyed by it. He was humiliated by it. He was a man of pride and vanity, I think, and he was really humiliated by the whole experience, and it soured him on Hollywood, on filmmaking. I think certainly, all the people who turned against him, he just didn't trust people after that.
Were the members of Congress, McCarthy, people involved on the political spectrum, were they somehow involved in the blacklist, or were the blacklists just people at the studio level who didn't want to go down as well? So they just said, let's just not work with these people.
Well, so the blacklist was unofficial, right? There was this Waldorf agreement that happened with all the, this unofficial thing that was never written down with all the studio heads in like the late, I guess, I forget exactly when, but at the Waldorf in New York, and they all agreed we're going to fire the people who were named in these committees, and we won't hire them anymore. And there were a few people who didn't want to acquiesce, but I think the fear of the general public, I think the fear of the American Legion, which was boycotting movies that had any sort of subversive elements to it, or people involved that had been labeled subversive. There was the government was speaking out against Hollywood. I think these guys were afraid of the bottom line and their profits.
I wonder, and this is, I don't know a lot about film of this era, but I wonder if films started to come out that were the exact opposite of what was coming out before, based on the fear of not wanting, like you said, public backlash.
100%. There was a lot of movies in the 30s and 40s that were musicals that were sort of really light fare. Nobody wanted to get too deep. It's like now a little bit. I mean, anything that touches any sore subjects, everyone's afraid to make those stories. I mean, I got a bunch of projects I'm pushing right now that are subversive by nature, and everyone's afraid. No one wants to touch anything that's not going to be a tentpole thing where everyone's going to, no one wants a boycott. No one wants the left or the right to,
Well, the way I think about it is if there was only the right or there was only the left, that's what it was like. If there's only that, and you're not part of that, or that's what it was like. And that, I mean, when you think about it in today's society, it's fucking terrifying.
Yes, it's terrifying. I agree. And where we're heading, who knows?
No,
I
can't.
Who knows? Like all of these.
No, please go
on.
No, please.
No, go on.
No,
please.
you go. You go. Nobody wants to get me started. They know they've been listening to the podcast. It's not a good idea.
I feel the same way, dude. I feel like the moment I start to go, it just I can't stop. And like back then, I'm afraid sometimes about what I say because you say the wrong thing. And
by the way, you should be afraid.
It's like the call's coming from inside the house.
Yes.
Look at my social media accounts. There's nothing there. You'll see nothing.
Totally. Yeah.
But let's look at it this way, right? Your grandfather's films, his legacy, his work has outlived everything else that he had to go through to get, those still live on, right? Those films are still classic films.
100%. And I think looking back on our history is a great way to look at where we're heading right now. And, there's a lot of doomsday scenarios that everyone's looking at and talking about. And it feels like things are reeling out of control in every direction. And, you look at those times and certainly those people in a different paradigm felt the same sort of the end of the world is coming and we're being persecuted and where are we to go? And, time went by and feelings shifted and global politics shifted and, we went through a different cycle. And so I'm hopeful that we can pull ourselves back from the abyss at this point, depending on what the next 6 months look like.
Amen.
And not fall apart as a country, because we've been in tough times before. It feels like we've never been in this place before, but you look back at recent history and there are some really scary moments in our country's history. Yeah.
I mean, I always look back at whenever things seem dire, being from Massachusetts, I think, well, there was a time we used to burn people at the stakes.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
we've come we've come far.
There's been progress, totally. Is what you're saying? Progress has been made.
Well, I'm just saying we can move beyond things
in 250 years.
Totally. Well, the Spanish Inquisition came and went, so that whole dark chapter.
Yeah. So, Michael, we have a listener question I want to ask you.
Yes.
And it comes from Alana P. And Alana asks, "You had a great run on NYPD Blue. I remember when everyone was aghast that the series showed butts, which seems super tame compared to today. But as an actor on that show, did you have to face a lot of questions about the riskiness of the content at that time?"
You know what? Looking back at that show, which I just saw an episode recently, it's so dated and it's so of a different era. But at the time, it was
very risky.
It was groundbreaking.
Yeah.
It was like it was the edge of the
even just the way it was shot, right? That was different for the time as well.
It was very handheld. People said they couldn't watch it because it made them sick, and of course now everything's handheld and jumping around. The writing, as we talked about, was incredible, and the actors too. And certainly there was nudity involved. I had a couple love scenes, but I had a love interest. but never nakedness. I accomplished that in other areas.
I just wanted to hear him talk about the history of the Hollywood 10 and the House of forever, man. Like, okay, but what happened to Dalton Trumbo? And how did Lee Grant get, blacklisted and came back? And did you know that she's Dinah Manoff's mom, who actually ended up being on Empty Nest? Blah, blah. Like, I'm just I just like how these things all work themselves out. Am I making any sense? Because I feel like I don't know what the fuck I'm saying.
Yes.
Does this make sense to you?
It makes sense
because
to me.
It doesn't make sense to me. Right,
but we didn't get into it. But his grandfather eventually got invited back into the industry and wrote Cleopatra in the 60s. And part of me would be like, fuck y'all.
The one thing I didn't want, I didn't know about his grandfather, but it's cool because I'm gonna read it. I'm gonna listen to the rest of the podcast, but about his grandfather. But a lot of people started using other people's names on their screenplays in order to get them done, kind of secret, secretly working. And I was wondering if his grandfather had done that, which I'm gonna find out, I guess. But it was such a treat to talk to him, and what an informed, lovely dude. And I wish him much success, and I can't wait for the movie. Thanks for listening.
Music by Denny Nucci. Produced and edited by the same two people you heard hosting this show, because they have no friends.